In this session, we'll take a look at evaluating trig functions and finding angle measures. And first, we'll take a look at the reciprocal functions. And notice we have the 6 reciprocal functions, and they're written in terms of trig functions. The last time we talked about the 6 trig functions, we mentioned Chief Sakatoa, and we were talking about opposites, adjacents, and hypotenuses. Here we're using the trig function to define trig functions. Now, as far as the calculator is concerned, since we do have, and let me just pull that calculator up. We do have a sine, cosine, and tangent button. So there's no need to write out sine, cosine, and tangent with their reciprocal identities. However, with cosecant, secant, and cotangent, it's very much different. Notice that we don't have a cosecant, secant, or cotangent button on the calculator. The secant to this negative first power, cosine to the negative first, and tangent to the negative first, those are called arc functions or inverse functions. So this first function is read as arc sine or the inverse of sine. The second function is the arc cosine or the inverse of cosine. And the last function is the arc tangent or the inverse of tangent. The top 3 are used to find angle measures. The bottom 3 are used to find side lengths. Now, since we don't have a cosecant, a secant, or a cotangent button on the calculator, we must use the reciprocal identities when we evaluate. For example, the cosecant is 1 over the sine. And this funny looking circle with the line through it that you see, this is the Greek letter of the alphabet theta. And theta just simply means an unknown angle measure. Okay, it's nothing more than a variable, an unknown number. So the cosecant of theta is 1 over sine, the secant is 1 over cosine, and the cotangent is 1 over tangent. All right, let's take a look at some examples. All right, so we want to evaluate each one of these by using a calculator. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on the calculator, and we're only using degree measures in this course, so you want to make sure whichever calculator that you're using, you are in degree mode. All right, so I'm in degree mode, so my calculator is all straight. I'm going to put in the cosine of 53.4. Right? No need to put in degree because we're in degree mode. And we get 0.596. Next, we're asked to evaluate the cotangent of 45 degrees. So keep in mind, we don't have a cotangent function on our calculator. So we must use the reciprocal identities and rewrite the cotangent as 1 over the tangent of 45. And if we put that into the calculator, 1 divided by the tangent of 45 degrees, we have 1. Now we'll evaluate the cosecant of 78.5. So keep in mind there is no cosecant button, so we're going to put in the cosecant as 1 divided by the sine of 78.5. And if I put that into the calculator, 1 divided by the sine of 78.5, we have 1.02. All right, next we'll find some angle measures. All right, now when we find angle measures, as I alluded to earlier, we're going to use the top 3, the arc functions. Okay. Now for this first example, the cosine of theta is equal to 0.528. So keep in mind that theta is an unknown angle measure. From algebra, we have the property of equalities, which states that when you do to one side, you must do the exact same thing to the other side. So here I'm going to take the arc cosine of both sides. Now, this is very rarely seen in textbooks for whatever reason. So I'm going to take the arc cosine All right, so I've taken the arc cosine of both sides. Now, what we actually have on the left is called an identity, right? So here are the identities. The arc cosine for the cosine of theta is equal to theta. The arc sine for the sine of theta is equal to theta. And the arc tangent for the tangent of theta is theta. Okay, for our purposes, we're going to use these identities. So if we take the arc cosine of both sides, right, which we have done here, notice that on the left-hand side, the arc cosine of the cosine of theta, that's going to simplify down to give me theta. And on the right-hand side, I'm left with the arc sine of 0.528. So I'm going to put that into the calculator. The arc cosine of 0.528. And we have 58.13 degrees. Right? So I'm simply taking the arc cosine of both sides. So now if we look at the next example, we have the tangent of theta is equal to 0.533. So here I'm going to take the arc tangent for both sides, but I'm just going to simplify that, and I'm going to write that as the theta is equal to the arc tangent of 0.533. And this is mainly the next step that you see in most textbooks, but notice that they have taken the arc tangent for both sides. And if I evaluate the arc tangent of 0.533 in the calculator, we have 28.06 degrees. All right, now lastly, what if you were asked to find the angle measure for a cosecant or a secant, right? Here is what we have. The arc cosecant of theta, right? Since there is no arc cosecant on our calculator, we must enter in the arc cosecant as the arc sine of 1 divided by x. If we're asked to evaluate an arc secant, we must enter in the arc secant as the arc cosine of 1 divided by x. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of examples. All right, so here we asked to find the two angle measures. The first says we want to find the angle that has the cosecant value of 1.7111. All right, so we would take the arc cosecant of both sides. All right, so once we take the arc cosecant for the cosecant of theta, we have theta. The right-hand side now becomes the arc sine of 1 divided by x. Well, x is 1.7111. And if we evaluate that on the calculator, this is the arc sine of 1 divided by 1.7111, and we have 35.76 degrees. Right, so notice I put that in as the arc sine of 1 divided by x. All right, for the last example, we want to find the angle for the secant of some unknown angle is equal to 2.0495. So keep in mind there is no secant function on the calculator. So if I look at the second formulation, right, we're going to write this out as theta is equal to the arc cosine of 1 over x, right, and x is 2.0495. And if we put this into the calculator, this is the arc cosine of 1 divided by 2.0495. And we have an angle measure of 60.8 degrees. Thanks for watching.